makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London with the conversations that matter, and here's what's coming up on today's program. Iran's president and foreign minister are killed in a helicopter crash in a mountainous part of the country. Their deaths add further uncertainty to a region already in turmoil. Copper surges to another record, gold also hitting new high, while investors bracing for Nvidia's earnings on Wednesday. Plus, Ryanair warns that fares may be flat this summer and that Boeing deliveries of the 737 MAX jets may actually slip further. So first of all, let's take a look at markets. I have to say there's quite a lot going on, especially for a Monday morning. Now, miners are actually keeping Europe's stock benchmark afloat this Monday morning. Prices for copper and gold surging to an all-time high. Oil also held in gains as the market is watching out for any fallout from political ructions in two of the world's major crude producers. We're, of course, thinking of Saudi Arabia and Iran. For the moment, there is a little bit of support overall for these European markets, but of course the timing of the Fed's likely pivot to raise rates or to cut rates has shaped trading across financial markets in recent days. So we also have CPI in the UK a little bit later on, but for the moment you can see S&P futures practically unchanged, gold almost at a record, and copper definitely at a record, over 10,900. If you look at the highest ever for copper, it's extending months rally, of course, driven by investors who've piled into the market in anticipation of deepening supply shortages. But investors really keeping an eye on the Middle East after the Iranian president died in a helicopter crash. So Iranian news agencies have confirmed that the country's president, Ebrahim Raisi, and foreign minister have died in this helicopter crash. Now, search teams located the wreckage in Iran's mountainous northwest region. So for more on this and what this means going forward, let's get straight to Tina Fordham, geopolitical strategist and founder of Fordham Global Foresight. We're also joined by Bloomberg's Middle East and Africa editor, Roz Matheson. So thank you both for joining us. Roz, I mean, this is pretty shocking news. And of course, it's happening in a region which is extremely volatile already. What happens next in Iran?
Well, that's the big question. Obviously, this was a shocking development for Iran, the deaths of the president and the foreign minister in this crash. What we know is that, of course, Raisi's deputy, the first vice president, takes over, at least for now. We'd expect an election to come within about 50 days. That's part of the Iranian constitution. So he's really there just to keep things going until there can be an election. But that's then the real question. Who would be the preferred candidate in that election? It is an election in quote marks, but of course it's also quite a managed process. So who's going to be the anointed person to be the candidate for that? And then beyond that, of course, he was seen as a key successor potentially to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And so with him gone, does that change that process? Does it mean that Khamenei's son becomes the key person in line to take over eventually at some point? Of course, the supreme leader is in his 80s. So there are longer-term questions also about that. But for Iran at the moment, policy-wise, it doesn't probably mean any significant change.
Ross, can you tell us about, I mean, we understand that Russia has also said that they would help with the investigation. We also heard from the U.S. that actually they don't think there was any foul play.
Well, that's right. And Israel has preemptively come out and said it had nothing to do with this. And you can see from the footage yesterday, the weather was appalling. I mean, the fog, now there's snow and mud. I mean, the conditions were terrible that they were flying in. Maybe it raises questions about why would you fly in those conditions. And also there are questions about the maintenance and status of those helicopters. Of course, they were very old. Given the US sanctions, were those helicopters being properly maintained? But at this point, it doesn't seem to be anything other than a terrible accident. And certainly there's no hint from the US or others that they think otherwise.
Tina, as we're saying with Roz, I mean, this is a very complex region. This is a very volatile region with geopolitics. What's the immediate concern that you have with the passing of the president?
Few in Iran will mourn the passing of Ebrahim Raisi, who was known as the Butcher of Tehran, and is thought to have presided over the execution of mass execution of political prisoners. So what we're really looking at is an internal power struggle within the leadership of Iran, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard. There'll be a lot of hope that within the country that there could be some possibility of moderate taking over the leadership. But as Rosalind has said, the elections will be tightly managed, and the obsession really with Iran's leadership is going to be controlling that succession and not allowing any opening for its domestic rivals to exploit.
For experts on the ground, his election in 2021 was largely seen as having been engineered by an unelected upper chambers and also got rid of many candidates that wanted to put themselves forward. Do we have any insight into that kind of history replicating itself now, or what do we know about possible other candidates?
It's going to be a managed transition. I think that they won't want to allow any daylight. Now, there is some hope that given the extremely low turnout in the last couple of elections, I mean, Iran does have elections, although they are tightly controlled and managed, they might be able to boost turnout by allowing some reformists, so-called reformists to run, like Lajani or others, might get more people in the streets. But given the protests of the last couple of years, the woman life freedom protests, and the extreme pressure the regime finds itself under, 50 years after the revolution, with its aging leadership and a very young population, plus the wider turmoil in the Middle East and the recent exchange of ballistic missiles between Israel and Iran, I suspect they're going to have candidates on the slate who will allow complete consistency. And that goes for domestic and foreign policy.
Roz, I guess, with my understanding is Raisi did not have the kind of political clout that some of the previous presidents enjoyed. Mohammed Ahmadinejad was extremely liked and had a big grassroots movement, and he was a hardliner. Again, who can emerge actually in this battle now?
Well, that is the key question. I mean, as Tina was saying, he wasn't as popular. The turnout was very low in 2021, but he was obviously endorsed by, the top leadership and in alignment with them, particularly, again, much more hawkish when it came to things like the nuclear deal with the US. And recently, of course, Iran's been embroiled through the back door and more directly in the last month when it comes to Israel. But there's also been the relationship between Iran and Saudi and that effort to try and normalize ties there. So it's going to be a question of consistency, whoever it is. There isn't really room at the moment for any kind of reformist to be more than a token candidate in the election. So what we're looking at is the current first vice president. Is he the person who would be seen to be getting the nod in the election to continue? Because, again, he was handpicked by Raisi in 2021.
And would Russia actually try and give as much support as they can to Iran right now?
Well, clearly they've been working very closely together in a bunch of ways. I mean, Iran's been sending drones to Russia to use in the war against Ukraine. Russia's been a strong supporter of Iran against the West. So there's a mutual relationship there that's going on. And certainly we've seen Russia come out very quickly today to express condolences. And they were very quick yesterday to express their concern about this. So they've got a vested interest in the status quo in Iran and in obviously having a similar kind of leadership after the election. So for Russia, it'll just be simply about ensuring that whoever's in power remains a hardliner.
And Tina, what does this mean for oil and oil markets?
I don't expect oil markets to move much on this news. I mean, after all, oil markets didn't move much after this unprecedented exchange of ballistic missile fire a few weeks ago. And I think that it's going to be shortly quite clear that the president's role is, largely ceremonial, that there isn't likely to be a change in government or in leadership, rather, from the supreme leader, and that this will be carefully stage managed. Will there be, for example, a replay of the 2008-2009 Green Movement? Highly unlikely, and this regime has been all about suppressing dissent.
Roz, the other, of course, big news is that Saudi Arabia's crown prince postponed a planned 4-day trip to Japan because his father, the king, is sick.
Well, that's right. So we know that his father was in hospital. He's got a bunch of ailments. He's now back at the palace, but he's receiving treatment. And the fact that this was publicised suggests that he's actually in pretty poor health, and certainly concerning enough that the Crown Prince has delayed his trip to Japan. I mean, obviously, the Saudi Crown Prince has been the de facto leader for some time. He's been doing the day-to-day governing of the country, and you'd imagine he would be the immediate successor at some point for the king. But you never know with Saudi Arabia. We know these successions can get a bit messy. We know that suddenly there can be surprises out of the woodwork, and so nothing is guaranteed in Saudi Arabia until it's done. And obviously it's in the interests of the Crown Prince, known as MBS at this point, to stay home, very close to home, while we see what's happening with the king's health.
Yeah, Tina, I mean, this, as Roz is saying, feels like, we could have, if not a surprise, certainly could change things in an already volatile region.
All of these developments are a great reminder that nobody controls the narrative, right? The discussions about the state of Middle East risk and geopolitical risk more broadly are extremely fluid. We're talking about succession plans that have always been opaque, whether it's Iran or Saudi Arabia, being accelerated to the fore, in this case by, very aging leadership. In the case of Saudi Arabia, with a much clearer succession. It will be watched closely, of course, the potential passing of the king. But I don't think there's much question. What is at issue, though, is the talks that are underway with the Saudis and Israel and the United States about this path to normalization. And could the passing of the king interrupt that flow, or perhaps reduce the risk appetite for considering something like that? I'm inclined to say no, but it does put a spanner in the works for the diplomacy that's underway.
Thank you both for joining us. Tina Fordham, geopolitical strategist and founder of Fordham Global Foresight, and Bloomberg's EMEA News director, Roz Matheson. Now, you can track all the developments on the story on our website, on the terminal. We have a wonderful, extremely interesting and insightful blog onto TLIV Go to get commentary analysis from our expert editors. Now, coming up, stocks waver while gold and copper surge to record highs. We'll have your markets wrap next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back. This is The Pulse. Of course, we're keeping a very close eye on all events in Iran after Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi has died in a helicopter crash. Now, we just heard from the Supreme Leader, of course, Ayatollah Khamenei, saying that the Vice President will manage the executive branch. He also says that the new presidential election will be within max of 50 days. That is the law in the country, so we were expecting that 50-day delay. But looking ahead, Raisi's successor likely won't be able to count on oil production to power growth to the same extent. We just had a wonderful panel with Tina Fordham and Roz Matheson trying to explain really how things could change, whether they change, and of course the big question at the moment, who will take over after the 50 days. Now, on to corporate news. Airbus, just in the last 10 minutes ago, saying that they will have secured an order for 105 of its narrow-body jets from Saudi Arabia's flagship carrier, as the kingdom also pours billions of dollars into turning the country into an aviation and tourism hub. Now, you can see Airbus gaining some 0.7%, nothing huge, but again, there's a big difference between how Airbus has been performing and, of course, how Boeing has been performing. On to markets, copper and gold prices have surged to all-time highs, with miners keeping Europe's stock benchmark afloat, oil holding on to gains as the market watches for any political fallout from Iran and Saudi Arabia, two of the world's major crude producers. Now, for more on all of this, we're joined by Beata, Manthey, a global equity strategist at Citigroup Global Markets. Beata, as always, thank you so much for coming in. I mean, you're a great student of course, balance sheets, trying to understand some of the industrials, some of the industries that will do better, especially in Europe valuations. And then you have these big geopolitical events that could change forces. How do you incorporate these big events into how you actually measure valuations?
So how about this? We've been arguing that earnings delivery and fundamental strengths this year would be the main driver of the markets. But the biggest risk to the markets would be geopolitics this year, right? So, of course, geopolitical flare-ups in the times where markets are ripe and quite bullish and euphoric are always a risk for some profit-taking. But as long as margins remain strong and we see that earnings are being delivered, if not, there are even signs that they could be upgraded, I think it's still a constructive path for equities going forward.
So, Beata, what's the way forward here? I mean, again, a lot of talk, inflation is under control, question mark, because the markets seem to think that it is in the U.S., but there's been a lot of volatility. How much does this impact at European equities?
So we argue that it's going in the right direction, and especially in Europe, right? That means we are going to get the rate cuts out of ECB. We also think we are going to get rate cuts out of the Fed, that Fed will move ahead of inflation properly leveling out because they are worried about the slowdown in the economy more than waiting for the inflation to slow down more. So overall, we think, again, constructive setup for equities, and of course some market participants are worried about elevated levels of valuation, but of course that's really the case for the US equities, which means in the international setup the equities outside of the US, Europe being one of them, look increasingly more attractive.
So what would you buy right now? What are the big market forces at play that make you confident on certain sectors?
So in our global equities portfolio recommendations, we are overweight continental Europe and we are overweight Japan. What we like, so it's really pro-cyclical trade, right? And going forward, we think it's more about cyclicality, not value or growth. It's about being in the right sector. So, for example, in deep value, our favorite sector is metals and mining in Europe. And of course, it's getting the headlines today, as you've mentioned, right? And on the more expensive side of cyclicals, we like tech, for example.
And tech, we have NVIDIA earnings on Wednesday. How much does something like that actually also, permeate through European tech equities? Or is it, there's just a lot more to rise because of valuations at the moment in Europe?
So the case for US tech or US AI stocks has been that it's been priced for perfection, right? So all the eyes are going to be on how much particular stocks over-deliver in the reporting. Of course, it will have effect on the tech in Europe as well, but we would argue it's leveled down on the valuation expectations and market expectations overall.
Thank you, Beata. Beata Manthey stays with us, global equity strategist at Citigroup Global Markets. We have a lot more to talk about when it comes to markets and corporates. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now, still with us, Beata Manthey, global equity strategist at Citigroup Global Markets. Now, Beata, thank you so much for sticking around. You're still constructive on a lot of equities. What happens to margins in this kind of environment?
So margins is an interesting point. There's been lots of worries about margins rolling over. Of course, margins have been helped by strong inflation. Now inflation is coming down. Will margins come down as well? So we've just published a big piece with all the analysts in Europe taking their view on particular sectors. And really the biggest takeaway is, yes, we do worry about particular parts of margins. So we worry that costs remain high, and we worry that prices are moderating, right? So that could affect negatively margins overall. However, the positive side is that volumes are expected to go up at most of the sectors, and also organic growth is rising. So that means net for margins overall for the market and for most of the sectors, it's still direction up, but in a more moderated way.
But I find it incredible, given what we've seen in terms of interest rates rise, through all of your great research, that you still see earnings per share to go up in this kind of environment.
So, of course, last year, if you put things in the context, in Europe, we had a borderline of EPS recession for European corporates, and global EPS was almost flattish as well, right? So it's about where we are coming from as well. And then, of course, in Europe, it's easier to argue that we are in this early cycle dynamics. Things are picking up. That helps that helps EPS, helps the margins. In fact, we actually see signs that our and the analysts' EPS growth for this year could be upgraded. So we expect 6%, and there are some encouraging signs of analysts upgrading against the seasonality patterns before the earnings season has started, which has a very good track record for earnings revisions to continue to be positive, and also the overall EPS going up. So if anything, perhaps our forecasts are on the conservative side for Europe.
Just stunning, given what we've lived through in the last 14 months. Thank you so much for joining us. Beata Manthey, there, global equity strategist at Citigroup Global Markets. Coming up, gold surges to a record high on Fed rate cut hopes, and silver actually hitting a near 11-year high. We'll be speaking to the chief executive of Wheaton Precious Metals. That's coming up next, and this is Bloomberg. Iran's supreme leader announces 5 days of mourning as the country's president and foreign minister are killed in a helicopter crash. Their deaths add further uncertainty to a region already in turmoil. Copper surges to another record while gold also hits a new high. Investors brace for Nvidia's earnings on Wednesday. Plus, Ryanair warns that fares may be flat this summer and that Boeing deliveries of 737 MAX jets may slip further. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, we're just getting some breaking news out of South Africa. The Constitutional Court there has ruled that the former President Jacob Zuma cannot run as a candidate for Parliament in this month's election. Now, the decision by the nation's top court raises a risk that supporters of his new MK party will stir unrest in the run-up to the May 29th vote or contest the outcome, while party leaders have vowed to destabilize the ballot if Zuma is barred from competing. If you look at Rand, of course, the currency over there in South Africa, it's extending some of the gains. We'll keep a very close eye on any kind of development in South Africa. Our team on the ground is following the developments very, very closely. Now, let's also return to our top story. Iran's supreme leader has announced 5 days of mourning for President Ebrahim Raisi. Now, this after Raisi's helicopter crashed in a mountainous region in the northwest of the country. Bloomberg's Sylvia Westall joins us with the very latest. Sylvia, this was, I imagine, a bit of a shock to everyone because it was so unexpected. What do we know about what happens next? We heard from the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, that there will be elections in the next 50 days. Do we know who could succeed?
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think there is this question about who will succeed Raisi as the president and what could happen in elections. The general expectation is that that sort of power base will remain in the hands of hardliners like Raisi himself. He was brought to power by a hardline base, and that looks unlikely to change. That's the kind of direction that Iran's been on. But I think one of the bigger questions we're looking at as well is that Raisi was seen by many analysts as one of the possible successors to the Supreme Leader himself. He was a cleric, he had this judicial background. So now with the Supreme Leader in his 80s, there is the question about who will actually succeed him as well in that top authority role. So there is an open question about who will become president after elections, but also longer term, who will succeed the Supreme Leader as the overall leader of Iran.
Sylvia, the Russian President Vladimir Putin also called the crash an enormous tragedy and described Raisi as a true friend of Russia. What do elections and 5 days of mourning mean for stability in the region?
Well, at the moment, I think, the fact that the announcements have come quite quickly, the expectation is we will move toward that. I think, as I mentioned, there's great kind of questions open about the longer-term leadership of the country. We have seen that, Iran has been on this path of confrontation with the West. More broadly, we have the Israel-Hamas war and the actions of Iran-backed Houthis and other proxy groups in the region. That's unlikely to change with any change in the leadership. There is unlikely to be this continued stirring and turmoil in the region as the Israel-Hamas war continues. And there's unlikely to be too much change in foreign policy. What has been interesting is that during the recent period, there has been a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, who have long been these great Middle East rivals. And there's a question about how that will continue and whether that will be continuing force in the region. And that has brought some kind of longer-term stability, at least regionally, right now, with this backdrop of the war as well.
Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us. Bloomberg's managing editor for the economy and government for Russia, Africa and the Middle East, Sylvia Westall. Now, you can track all the developments in the story on our website, but also on the terminal. We have a really fantastic blog. Go to TLIVGo to get commentary and analysis from our expert editors as we try and understand the political and global ramifications of what's going on in Iran. Now, gold has surged to an all-time high, boosted by optimism that the Fed will start easing monetary policy this year. Silver also trading at a near 11-year high on supply constraints. Now, for more, let's speak to Randy Smallwood, Chief Executive of Wheaton Precious Metals. Randy, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, there's so much going on in the metals, and you're a listed company, you're a big company, and basically you facilitate payments so that you, I guess, understand, maybe quicker than others, about what kind of demand there is for some of the precious metals.
Well, yeah, we're a streaming company, so we invest into mines. We don't actually operate mines, but we're focused on the precious metal space, as the name implies. But it does give us a broad exposure because we invest into the new mine construction. We supply capital around the world, and there's just not a lot of new production. So the supply side is getting squeezed pretty tight, and there's increasing demand all over the place.
So what happens to copper? We had some wonderful conversations, for example, with Jeff Curry, ex-Goldman Sachs, now Carlyle, saying, look, we're running out of everything.
Yeah.
Is there a danger that there's now going to be then overcapacity or too much investment, and then there's going to be too much copper? Or is there not one thing as too much copper?
The expectations in terms of needs for copper, in terms of electrifying the world and the way that we want to move forward in this world, there's just not enough copper available for the next while. And so, one of the challenges is it's getting tougher and tougher to build mines, to build new mines, in terms of permitting and building them in your backyard. Nobody wants a mine in their backyard. Unfortunately, we all want to consume the product, and so that just keeps on going. And so there's been a lack of investment into the space, and I think that's finally what's going to give us a squeeze in this market. So,
Randy, when you look at, for example, higher gold, higher silver prices, what does it mean for a company like Wheaton?
Oh, it's pretty good. We've got good, strong growth. Our company has got about 40 to 50% growth over the next while. So we're going to climb close to 1 million gold equivalent ounces per year of production. And of course, with higher prices like this, especially with a streaming company, because our costs are fixed. We're not a traditional mining company in the sense that there's no cost risk on our side. Our costs are defined by the contract itself. And so this upside in prices is delivered directly to our shareholders. And it's one of the reasons why we're also seeing record Wheaton share prices right now. So
I know. I mean, I'm looking at your market cap is over $25 billion. Yeah. But when you look at what's sustaining the price of gold right now, so part of it, I don't know how much of it is demand, but part of it is basically central banks saying treasuries have a political aspect. Mm-hmm. Let me sell off treasuries and buy gold.
Right. Well, it's, I think what we saw is the U.S. dollar, which is generally considered the main reserve currency of the world. Over the last few years, it's had some cracks in the foundation, so to speak. We're not talking about the fiscal mismanagement. We're talking more about the fact that it's a political instrument. And so there's an increasing appetite for gold from all sorts of sovereign central banks around the world, especially out of the Middle East and out of the Far East, China. There's a constant drive, both at the central bank level, but also at the retail side. And what I see, and especially with seeing silver move over the last couple of weeks, we're starting to see silver pick up. Yeah. Is I think that interest is spreading. It's spreading to the west.
But so you make 40% of your revenue from silver.
Right.
What's sustaining silver right now? I mean, it's a different story to gold. This is not an inflation hedge, is it?
Well, so silver's. It's a precious metal, but it's also got, it's one of the most critical minerals out there in terms of high efficiency. It conducts electricity better than any other metal. So the more silver we have in our phones and in our mobile electronics, even in our cars, the more efficient they are. The better power you get, the longer your batteries leave. So there's an increasing demand for silver as we try and get more efficient around the world. So silver's got both that and the precious metals demand, and that's what we're seeing now is starting to be a pickup in the precious metals demand.
Randy, do you have a very clear idea of how much more copper, how much more silver we need for the energy transition? So if we're staying on this trajectory, is it 40% more copper in 10 years, or is it more?
Yeah, I would say it's more than that. I mean, really, it does come down to how fast do we accept electric vehicles and swing over to that. That's the big demand driver on that. But it is the technology side, though, too. As we want to get to the Internet of Things, it all has to be connected somehow. So copper needs to play a role in that. It really comes down to how fast can the world afford to go forward. But what we need to do is start building some new mines and not shutting them down, not having challenges with respect to permitting. It's getting tougher and tougher to actually find the new deposits. I know that because our company is at the leading edge of funding these new mine developments, and we're just not seeing the same number of opportunities that we've seen in years past.
Can you do it in a green way? Is this a concern? So is it government permits trying to, keep a lot of the riches for their own country, or is this, ethically concerning for green issues?
Well, and the challenge is we need the materials, and so I don't think any of us we're always trying to improve in terms of how we actually produce the materials that the society needs. We need these materials. I would much rather produce these materials in well-regulated, well-administered jurisdictions than to ship it off into jurisdictions where you don't have that same level, right? So it's way better to control that production in backyards where you have good, strong environmental regulations, good, strong social requirements in terms of that. So I'd rather produce it in good, clean, green areas where you actually get that going forward. So, but we just need that support.
Randy, any M&A? I know you've been pretty acquisitive in the past. What's on your mind now?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's about new opportunities, new assets to help fund. In terms of trading for the peers itself, we've seen enough opportunities to help fund new mine construction. That keeps us busy, so we don't see anything on that side. Okay,
Randy, great to speak to you. Thanks so much for coming on. That was Randy Smallwood, Chief Executive of Wheaton Precious Metals, with a market cap of over $25 billion. Now, coming up, the European Reconstruction and Development Bank faces challenges from natural disasters, conflict on multiple continents, and sticky inflation. We're discussing those challenges with Odile Renaud-Basso, who has secured a second term as the bank's president. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Now, a range of crises, including conflict on multiple continents, natural disasters, and sticky inflation, have put pressure on the resources of the development banks around the world. Well, one institution, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, has committed to investing billions in Ukraine after managing to offset the significant loss it sustained in the wake of Russia's invasion. Now, the bank returned to a net profit of 2.1 billion euros in 2023, which was also a record year of investment for the organization. Well, to discuss all of this, I'm delighted to be joined by the EBRD's recently re-elected president, Odile Renaud-Basso. Thank you, Madam President, for joining us. I know the EBRD has just had their annual conference in Yerevan. There are big issues in terms of your funding, members. It feels that the world is much more volatile, it's much more concerning. What does it mean for a bank like yourself? Is it more difficult, or do you feel like it's more important to be there?
Both. I think it's more important to be there. It makes our role more important than ever, because I think that we can help stabilizing and help countries dealing with emergency situation, be it, wars or natural disasters, but it also makes it more challenging. And that's why it was very important for us to get the support from our shareholders, and we got a decision to have a capital increase to give us the financial strength to be able to deal with this volatility and to continue to support our countries of operation, including Ukraine, in front of the challenges they were facing.
It's extremely difficult to talk about a reconstruction of a country that's still at war, because you don't know where it ends up, and we don't know how many years it will take for that to settle down. What are some of the conversations you're having?
No, I think our focus is very much to support Ukraine now, and of course to be able to do more in reconstruction. But indeed, currently, Ukraine needs, of course, military support. They also need budget support, because they have a huge budget effort needed to finance the war and to keep the state functioning, and they need economic support, and that's what we are providing to keep private sector afloat. And last year we provided 2 billion of financing, 2 billion euros of financing. Half of it was for the private sector to keep, working capital for business, trade finance, and provide financing to rebuild facilities, logistics capabilities, and so forth. But also half of it is for the infrastructure, energy, electricity, transportation, railway, and so forth. And this is very important to keep the economy functioning, generate revenues, keep jobs for people, and that's part of the effort we need to do for Ukraine.
I mean, Ukraine just also got a big package from the U.S. What happens if the U.S. stops funding Ukraine in a couple of years? How much more bandwidth do you have to step in and support?
I mean, the support from the U.S. is very important, and it's a very positive news for Ukraine, and I hope that the military material will come very quickly. And this is continued effort. So I think with the package, I mean, this gives some visibility, but continuing the support will be absolutely key. You have also the EU package, which now is in place. So all this is important to keep the country going.
I mean, the bank was really started as a lender for ex-communist world, and now you're expanding into other areas. But how worried are you about what's going on in Georgia? We spoke to the president. Actually, let's listen to the president on Friday with this law that is named the Russian law, and what that means also for civil liberties. Here she is.
We might be losing a very important chance, and that chance might not come back in the future. And that would be the responsibility of the government. So there is concern in the society, there is concern among our partners.
And the concern, I imagine, does it make it more difficult to the EBRD to try and step in?
I mean, we provide some financing to Georgia, but we are concerned with the development. Georgia has been a country which huge impetus for reform, and a very dynamic economy. But, of course, the geopolitical development and the decision and this law creates a lot of uncertainty because of on economic situation, and you've seen some impact on the value of the companies, the banking sector in particular, but also in the EU prospect. And I think that creates a lot of uncertainty, and we're worried by this development.
I mean, do you worry about a pattern, actually, in some of these countries of Russia taking hold, or prime ministers that want to reflect and maybe even mirror what's happening in Russia?
Each country in a very different situation. We were in Armenia, it's a very different dynamics, a very, strong willingness to develop relationship with Europe. So each country are in a very different situation, but indeed Georgia is quite in a worrying point.
Talk to me about, so you're expanding really, you have plans for sub-Saharan Africa. I think we have new member states, Kenya, Nigeria. What do you see as some of those challenges?
So that's a very exciting new chapter for the EBRD, because it will be new geography. And the challenges are, the demographic dynamics are very important. So the key will be to create jobs. That's why our mandate, which is to develop the private sector, is so important, because you create jobs by small businesses, big businesses, private sector investment. So that will be one of the key challenges we will be trying to help with, as well as climate change, because the continent is very much affected, and financing adaptation, mitigation, so forth will be very important.
Is it more difficult now to talk about climate change and the transition, given all of the geopolitical uncertainty, but also the fact that many companies, private companies, no longer really want to talk about it because they fear of repercussion from the U.S.?
On the one hand, you see some pushback and some pushback, really, but on the other hand, when you see the reality of what's going on, droughts, floods, and so forth, the reality of climate change is also much more visible, and the acceleration of the crisis is there. So I think there is also a feeling of need to address it more quickly and definitely. So it's not a unified trend, but I think that from a bank like us, this is a clear priority, and we are going to continue to step our investment in this area, and to try to bring private investors together with us. And we see the positive news is that the cost of renewable, for example, has been decreasing very, very significantly. So this is becoming a very cheap source of energy. So there is a big trend, and it's a big opportunity for a number of countries in south of the Mediterranean, in Africa. That could be a huge opportunity also.
And you have the right investors? I mean, how do you see, again, is it investors matching with politicians and policies? Or if you look at all the challenges, actually, for the transition, is there a sticky point? The
sticky point is to find the level of private financing that is needed, and so to have the risk appetite to invest in countries that are perceived as more risky. But also, you need to bring private investors and to address some public policy elements, for example, because if you want to develop renewable, you need to have the grids, and this very often is public sector investment, and you need to have this very clear strategy, ambitious strategy, so as to have all the elements brought together and to really be able to develop and to expand these green energy sources.
I mean, in the last 10 years, some of the institutions, the big institutions, the World Bank, even the UN, have been challenged, mainly by President Trump, but also a number of other actors on the world stage. Has that hurt what you can do on the ground?
No, it doesn't hurt. I think that what is a challenge for the MDBs, Multilateral Development Bank, is more that if the country is fragmenting and tension, I mean, the impact of geopolitical tension creates, of course, some challenge, because by definition, multilateral banks are there to create common views, common consensus, and working together. But that's why also we are much more important, even now, because we are a space where common decisions can be taken, and we have common challenges for the world that needs to be addressed collectively.
Do you think there's a collective narrative, or at least that a lot of your member states, have a common goal? This was the worry 4 or 5 years ago, that everyone was kind of splintering, so it was difficult to have a cohesive structure or narrative.
But, for example, our shareholders took the decision to increase our capital so as to be able to support Ukraine and all our countries of operation, and this is a very strong sign of unity and of cohesiveness. So that's a very positive sign, I would say.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was the President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Odile Renaud-Basso, joining us this morning. Coming up, Ryanair meets full-year estimates but says it might need to discount tickets to spur bookings. More on that next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, Ryanair shares are lower this morning after reporting full-year earnings. Despite meeting estimates, the Irish airline says ticket prices may be flat to modestly higher. Now, it says it's having to discount fares in 3 months to June in order to spur bookings. Well, let's get more on the story with Bloomberg's Sid Philip, our expert in all things trains and planes and automobiles. So what do these earnings, Sid, good morning, what do these earnings actually mean for the rest of the industry during the critical summer months?
Morning. So Ryanair is already a bellwether for the European summer travel demand. And summer is really when all the European airlines make their money. And so for Ryanair, this is the most crucial part of the year. And it sort of gives us an indicator that sort of the revenge travel boom, where people are willing to pay anything for air travel, may be coming to an end. And people might be sort of holding out for better deals, they may be holding out for better prices, and people aren't really willing to spend as much as it takes to get to the beach this summer.
So what does it mean for these airlines? Do they have to offer discount tickets?
It does. I mean, Ryanair is already saying that they have to discount tickets in the first quarter, which is the quarter until June. And I think that sort of really gives them a sense of the fact that the demand is there is still demand, but not demand at any price. And the rest of the industry is going to be watching that to see how it plays out for the rest of the summer.
And then, Sid, big news from Airbus. So they won a big order from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so Airbus won an order for 105 Airbus narrow bodies from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is trying to build up its aviation industry. They're trying to build up a domestic and international industry and sort of reduce their reliance on oil. And so for Airbus, it's a big deal because they get the sort of, they already are big in Saudi Arabia. This gets them even bigger, and it sort of also shows the remarkable demand for the A321. I mean, the Saudis said that they were hoping to get more planes, but Airbus doesn't have any more planes to sell, so Airbus is in a tricky place in terms of trying to meet the demand for their planes.
So interesting. Sid, thank you as always. Sid Philip, their aviation expert. Now, later today, Bloomberg is also speaking to Michael O'Leary. It's never a dull interview. The chief executive of Ryanair on those earnings at 1:15 p.m. UK time. Well, Bloomberg Brief is up ahead. Menace and Danny talk markets, and of course they talk geopolitics. This is Bloomberg.